David had always dreamed of living away from the noisy streets of the city. For years he had worked in an office surrounded by tall buildings, endless traffic, and constant stress. Every morning was the same: rushing to catch the bus, sitting in meetings, and returning late at night with no peace in his mind. What he wanted most was a quiet life, a place where he could hear the wind through the trees instead of horns on the road, a place where he could grow something with his own hands. After saving money for many years, David finally bought a small apple farm on the edge of a quiet town. The farm was not huge, but it had everything he wanted: rows of young apple trees, a simple wooden house, an old red barn, and wide open fields where the sky seemed endless. For him, it was not just land. It was a dream come true. The farm was close to a neighborhood that had a homeowners association, or HOA as people called it. The HOA liked rules. They had rules about how high grass could grow, what color houses could be painted, and even when garbage bins could be placed outside. David's farm, however, was not under the control of this HOA. His land stood just outside the border, free from their rules. Still, the people living in that neighborhood could see his farm clearly, and one of them in particular did not like it. Her name was Karen. She was the type of person who always noticed everything happening around her. From her window, she would watch neighbors mow their lawns, kids ride their bikes, or delivery trucks pass by. She was quick to complain if something was not done her way. Some neighbors tried to avoid her. Others simply nodded politely, but everyone in the area knew that Karen loved rules more than kindness. When David moved into the farm, Karen was the first to notice. She saw the moving truck arrive, she saw David unload furniture, and she saw him park his old farm truck near the barn. She narrowed her eyes and whispered to herself that this was trouble waiting to happen. At first, David paid little attention to Karen. He was busy fixing fences, cleaning the barn, and planting more trees. He worked from sunrise to sunset, enjoying every bit of his new life. Whenever he passed Karen on the road, he smiled and greeted her. She never smiled back. Instead, she gave short replies or simply turned away. One morning, David decided to set up a small stand by the edge of his farm. He placed a wooden table under a tree and filled baskets with shiny red and green apples. His idea was simple. He wanted people passing by to enjoy fresh fruit. Children from the nearby houses came running, their eyes wide with excitement. David handed them apples for free, laughing as they bit into the sweet fruit. Parents thanked him, and soon word spread that the new farmer was a kind and generous man. But not everyone was happy. Karen stood on her porch watching with disapproval. She saw children running to the farm. She saw cars stopping for apples, and she told herself that this was unacceptable. In her mind, David was breaking some kind of rule. She did not care that the farm was outside the HOA's control. To her, it was close enough to disturb the order of her neighborhood, she muttered to herself as she picked up her phone. Selling food without permission, trucks on the street, children running everywhere. This is chaos. She convinced herself that David must be running an illegal business. And in her world, illegal meant dangerous. Karen called a few neighbors complaining about the farm. Some listened politely but did not agree. Others ignored her completely. Still, Karen could not rest. She was determined to do something. One evening, she sat in her living room staring out of her window at the lights glowing from David's barn. She tapped her fingers on the table, feeling restless. Finally, she picked up her phone again, this time to call the police. She reported that a man was running a food business without permission, that strangers were coming into the neighborhood, and that it was unsafe. She spoke with confidence, making it sound urgent. The officer on the phone listened carefully, took notes, and promised to send someone to check. The next morning, David woke up early as usual. The sun was rising, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. He walked outside, stretched his arms, and breathed in the fresh air. He had a long day ahead, watering the trees, picking apples, and repairing a section of the fence. He felt content, unaware of what was about to happen. Around mid-morning, as he was carrying a basket of apples to the stand, he noticed a police car driving up the dirt road. At first, he was surprised. He had done nothing wrong. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the car. The officer stepped out, greeted him politely, and explained that they had received a complaint. David listened with calm attention. His eyes did not show fear, only curiosity. He asked what the complaint was about, And when the officer explained, David smiled softly. "Well, officer, I think it would be best if I show you around," he said. His voice was steady and kind. Karen, who had been waiting behind her curtain, saw the police car arrive. Her heart leapt with excitement. She rushed outside, pretending to be innocent but clearly eager to see what would happen. She stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes shining with satisfaction. In her mind, she pictured the officer scolding David, maybe even writing him a fine. She imagined the farm being shut down. She imagined telling her neighbors that she had been right all along, but things did not go as she expected. The officer followed David into the barn. Inside, everything was neat and organized. Crates of apples were stacked carefully, tools were placed in proper racks, and the air smelled of fresh fruit. David opened a folder and handed it to the officer. It contained his permits, inspection reports, and certificates from the Agricultural Board. Everything was official, everything was in perfect order. The officer nodded, clearly impressed. He asked a few questions, and David answered them with confidence. There was no sign of anything illegal. On the contrary, it was clear that David's farm was fully licensed and even respected by local authorities. Outside, Karen waited, her smile slowly fading. She shifted her weight from one foot to another, starting to feel nervous. She tried to listen, but she could not hear everything. Finally, the officer walked back out with David beside him. Instead of an angry tone, the officer smiled and said, "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Everything looks perfect here. I must say these are some of the best apples I've seen in a long time." David simply nodded politely. "Thank you, officer. Would you like to take some with you?" The officer laughed lightly, picked an apple from a crate, and took a bite. His face brightened. "Delicious," he said before returning to his car. Karen stood frozen. Her plan had failed. She had expected David to be in trouble, but instead the officer left with a smile and an apple in his hand. David turned to Karen, who looked pale. He did not raise his voice or show anger. He simply said, "Good morning, Karen. I hope you're having a pleasant day." Then he went back to his work as if nothing had happened. Karen did not reply. She turned slowly and walked back to her porch, her mind spinning with confusion and embarrassment. For the first time, she felt that maybe she had made a mistake. But her pride would not let her admit it. Not yet. The children soon returned to the farm, laughing as they picked apples. Parents stopped by to chat with David. The farm was full of life and joy, and Karen, standing at her window once more, felt more unsettled than ever. Karen could not stop thinking about what had happened. She had been so sure that the police would shut down David's farm. She had imagined him embarrassed, maybe even packing his things to leave. Instead, the officer had left smiling with an apple in his hand. The image of David standing calm and confident bothered her more than anything. That night, Karen sat in her kitchen sipping tea, staring at the clock. The world outside was quiet, but her mind was not. She replayed the moment over and over. The officer praising David's apples, David smiling politely, the children laughing in the distance. It all felt like a defeat. She told herself that she had only lost the first round. The next morning, she woke up determined. Karen was not the type to give up easily. She believed that rules and order were more important than anything else, and she felt it was her responsibility to protect the neighborhood. From her porch, she watched as David loaded baskets of apples into his truck. A few cars stopped by the stand, and she saw people leaving with bags of fruit. To her, this was proof of a business running right in front of her eyes. Karen grabbed her phone. She dialed a number, and within minutes she was speaking to a neighbor named Mark. Mark was a quiet man who usually kept to himself, but Karen was persuasive. "Have you noticed all the traffic near the farm?" she asked, her voice sharp. "People coming and going, trucks driving in and out. This is not safe for our children." Mark hesitated. "Well, my kids like going there. They get free apples." "It seems harmless." Karen clicked her tongue. "Harmless now, but what if strangers start coming in from other towns? What if it brings problems? You know how rules are important here. If we allow one person to break them, soon everything falls apart." Mark sighed. "But his land isn't part of the HOA. We don't really have control over it." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not officially, but it affects us. If property values drop because of this farm, are you ready to lose money?" Mark stayed silent, clearly uncomfortable. Karen pressed harder. We need to stand together. If the police see more people are concerned, they will take it seriously. I cannot be the only one fighting this. By the time she hung up, she had convinced herself that she was right. She called 2 more neighbors, spreading worry with her words. Some ignored her, some agreed just to end the conversation, but Karen felt satisfied. She believed she was building a case. Later that afternoon, David was busy repairing the fence near the orchard. The sun was warm, and the smell of apples filled the air. A group of children rode their bicycles down the dirt road, waving at him. He waved back with a smile. His farm was slowly becoming a friendly spot for families, and he liked that. He enjoyed sharing his harvest and meeting people who appreciated fresh fruit. But while David worked with peace in his heart, Karen was preparing her second move. She called the police again, this time with a longer and louder complaint. She said there were cars blocking the street, noise at all hours, and health risks from food being given away without permission. She described David as if he were a careless stranger instead of a responsible farmer. The officer who answered recognized her voice. Karen had called many times in the past about small issues, children playing too loudly, grass not cut short enough, or mail left in the wrong spot. Still, the police could not ignore a complaint completely. They promised to send someone to observe the situation. Karen felt pleased. She pictured more officers arriving, maybe with questions David could not answer. She imagined herself standing proudly as the one who had saved the neighborhood. 2 days later, on a sunny morning, another patrol car drove slowly toward the farm. David noticed it from a distance. He put down the basket he was carrying and walked toward the car with the same calm smile. This time, 2 officers stepped out. One was young and serious, the other older and patient. They introduced themselves politely and explained that more complaints had been made. David nodded. Of course, officers. Please, come and see for yourselves. Once again, he opened the barn, showed them the neatly stacked crates and handed them his permits and certificates. He explained where the apples went, to local schools, hospitals, and markets. He showed the small section where he allowed neighbors to pick fruit for free, making it clear that it was not a business but a gesture of kindness. The older officer smiled. Everything seems in order. You even have all the documents ready. Honestly, this is better organized than most farms we see. The younger officer looked around carefully, then asked, Do you sell apples directly here every day? David shook his head. Not every day. Most of my harvest is delivered to institutions. Sometimes families stop by and I let them take some home. Children enjoy it, and I like to share. The younger officer nodded slowly. I see no violation here. Outside, Karen had appeared once again. She stood a few steps away, listening closely. Her face was tight with frustration. When the officers walked out, she stepped forward. Officers, you must understand, she said quickly. This farm is a problem. It is bringing strangers into our neighborhood. It is not safe. Property values will go down. You cannot just allow this. The older officer looked at her calmly. Ma'am, this farm is not under your HOA. It is private property. The owner is following every legal requirement. There is nothing unlawful here. Karen's voice rose. But it disturbs us. He should not be allowed to do this. The younger officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, with respect, disturbance is not the same as a crime. We cannot stop someone from running a legal farm on their own land. Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing without words. The officers thanked David for his cooperation, then returned to their car. One of them even bought a small basket of apples before leaving. As the patrol car rolled away, David glanced at Karen. She stood stiff and pale, her plan collapsing again. Good afternoon, Karen, he said kindly, then returned to his work. That evening, Karen sat on her porch in silence. The sound of children laughing drifted across the road as families visited the farm. She clenched her fists, feeling both embarrassed and angry. She did not understand how David could remain so calm while she burned inside with frustration. But Karen was not finished. In her mind, she was still the guardian of the neighborhood, the one who had to enforce order. She promised herself that she would find another way, a stronger way to stop David. She did not know how yet, but she was determined. Across the road, David finished his work and sat on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the sun set over the orchard. He felt grateful for his new life. The farm gave him peace and the community gave him joy. He had no idea how far Karen's determination would go, but he trusted that truth would always stand stronger than false complaints. And so, while one neighbor planned her next call, David continued to water his trees, share his apples, and dream of a future filled with quiet mornings and golden harvests. The days on David's farm passed peacefully, but not everyone saw it that way. To him, every sunrise was a gift. He would rise early, brew a cup of coffee, and walk through the rows of apple trees, checking the leaves and blossoms. Birds sang in the branches, and the air was fresh with the promise of harvest. Neighbors often stopped by with their children, leaving with smiles and bags of fruit. For David, the farm was more than a business. It was a way of life, a place to share joy. But to Karen, each of those days felt like an insult. She watched from her window as cars parked by the stand and children laughed while eating apples. Every cheerful sound made her jaw tighten. In her mind, David was not a kind farmer but a rule breaker who had somehow fooled the police. One afternoon, as she trimmed the flowers near her porch, Karen muttered to herself, "There has to be something he is hiding. No one is this perfect. If I look hard enough, I will find it." Her chance came sooner than she expected. That same week, the town hosted a small market fair. Local farmers and bakers set up stalls selling honey, bread, vegetables, and fruit. David was invited to bring his apples, and he agreed happily. He loaded crates of bright red and golden apples into his truck and drove into town. Children waved at him as he left, and families wished him good luck. Karen saw it all. She narrowed her eyes and followed the truck in her car, keeping a safe distance. She parked near the market and walked around, pretending to shop, but her eyes stayed fixed on David. His stall quickly became one of the busiest. People crowded around, tasting slices of crisp apple, buying baskets to take home. Even the mayor stopped by to shake David's hand and praise the quality of his produce. Karen clenched her fists. The sight of so many people admiring him felt unbearable. She decided to act. Marching forward, she pushed her way to the stall. "Excuse me," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the cheerful noise. "Do you have a permit to sell here? Is this even allowed?" The crowd turned, surprised by her sharp tone. David looked at her calmly. He reached under the table and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents issued by the town council, giving him full permission to sell at the fair. He handed them to the mayor, who checked them and nodded with approval. "He has every right to be here," the mayor announced. "In fact, we are lucky to have him. These apples are some of the best in the region." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people smiled at David, offering words of encouragement. Karen felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She tried to protest, but her voice faltered under the weight of so many disapproving stares. David, however, remained gentle. He did not raise his voice or mock her. He simply said, "Karen, you're welcome to take some apples, too. They are fresh from the orchard." Karen froze. She had expected anger or defensiveness, but instead she was offered kindness. She turned sharply and walked away, her heart pounding with frustration. That night she could not sleep. The sound of the mayor praising David echoed in her head. She tossed and turned, wondering how a simple farmer could earn so much respect. Finally, she decided that if she could not catch him breaking rules at the fair, she would investigate his farm more closely. The next morning, while David worked in the orchard, Karen slipped quietly along the edge of his property. She peered through the fence, taking notes in a small book. She wrote about the number of crates, the trucks that came and went, and even the people who stopped by for apples. She was determined to find something suspicious, but the more she watched, the more she realized everything seemed in order. The trucks were clean and carried official labels. The crates were marked with seals from the Agricultural Board. Visitors smiled and greeted David with respect. It was not the picture of wrongdoing she wanted to see. Her frustration grew with each passing day. Finally, she decided to confront him directly. One afternoon, she marched across the road and called out to him. "David, I want to know the truth," she said firmly. "You cannot fool me. Who are you really, and what are you doing here?" David looked up from where he was pruning a tree. He wiped his hands on a cloth and studied her for a moment. There was no anger in his eyes, only patience. "Karen," he said gently, "I have nothing to hide. Would you like to see? Before she could answer, he gestured for her to follow him. Curious despite herself, she walked beside him as he led her toward the barn. He opened the wide doors, and inside she saw not only crates of apples but also shelves filled with binders, reports, and certificates. He pulled one down and handed it to her. This, he explained, is the inspection report from last month. The agricultural board checks every corner of my farm. Everything passed with high marks. Karen flipped through the pages, her eyes darting over the official stamps and signatures. She tried to find a flaw but saw none. David then pointed to another section of the barn where framed awards hung on the wall. And these, he continued, are recognitions from schools and hospitals. I supply them with fresh apples every season. It helps children eat healthy and patients recover with good nutrition. Karen felt her stomach twist. She had expected to uncover secrets, but instead she was looking at proof of respect and responsibility. Still, she tried to hold on to her pride. Anyone can hang papers on a wall, she said sharply. David did not react. Instead, he walked to a wooden cabinet and opened it. Inside were photographs showing him at conferences, standing beside other scientists, holding certificates of achievement. One picture showed him shaking hands with a government official. Another showed him teaching children about farming. I used to work in agricultural research, David said quietly. I studied apples for many years. My work helped farms across the country, but I wanted a simpler life, so I came here. This farm is not about money. It is about sharing something good with others. Karen's mouth went dry. For a moment, she could not speak. The man she had thought of as a nuisance was in fact someone respected far beyond her neighborhood. She felt small and foolish standing in his barn surrounded by evidence of his hard work. David's voice remained kind.
Karen, I know you care about rules and order.
But sometimes kindness and trust build stronger communities than strict rules. My farm is open to everyone, even you. He picked up a bright apple from a crate and handed it to her. Karen hesitated, her pride battling her curiosity. Finally, she took it. The fruit was warm from the sun, its skin shining. For the first time, Karen did not have an answer. She turned and left the barn silently, clutching the apple in her hand. That evening, she sat on her porch staring at it. She wanted to throw it away, to prove she was still right, but something stopped her. Slowly, she raised it to her lips and took a bite. The taste was sweet, crisp, and fresh. It was unlike any apple she had eaten before. And in that small moment, though she would never admit it out loud, Karen felt her certainty crack. The apple that Karen bit into that evening stayed in her thoughts far longer than she expected. Its sweetness seemed to linger, not only on her tongue but also in her mind. She had spent weeks trying to prove that David was a problem, a man who brought disorder into her neighborhood. Yet here she was, sitting on her porch with the memory of the crisp taste making her wonder if she had been wrong. Still, Karen's pride was not easy to break. She told herself it was only an apple, nothing more. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe David was not the careless man she had painted him to be. The next few days passed quietly. David continued his routine, rising early, tending to his trees, loading crates, and greeting visitors with warmth. The community's respect for him only grew. Parents brought their children to learn about farming. Teachers asked him to speak at schools, and families praised his generosity. Karen, however, watched all of this with mixed feelings. She was torn between her old belief that David was a nuisance and her new knowledge that he was far more than that. The sight of people admiring him made her uneasy, but she could not deny the truth of what she had seen in his barn. One afternoon, unable to hold her curiosity any longer, Karen walked across the road again. David was repairing a wooden gate near the orchard. He looked up and gave her a smile as if he had been expecting her. "Good afternoon, Karen," he said. "Would you like to come in?" Karen hesitated but nodded. She stepped onto the farm, her shoes crunching on the gravel. For a moment she felt out of place, as though she was entering another world. David put down his tools and led her toward the farmhouse. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs and certificates, just as she had seen in the barn. But here there were also bookshelves filled with journals, notebooks, and research papers. On the table lay open documents filled with sketches of apple trees, soil reports, and charts. Karen's eyes widened as she looked around. "What is all this?" she asked softly. David pulled out a chair for her. "This is my work," he explained. "Before I came here, I was part of a research team in the city. We studied new ways to grow apples, ways that use less water, resist disease, and taste better. The methods we developed are now used on farms across the country. Karen's mouth parted in surprise. You were a scientist? David nodded. Yes, but I didn't want to spend my whole life in laboratories and meetings. I wanted to live among the trees to see the results of my work with my own eyes. That is why I bought this farm. Karen felt her heart beat faster. She had imagined David as a simple man, someone careless with rules. But now she was sitting in the home of a man whose work had touched far more people than she could have guessed. David continued, his voice calm but filled with quiet pride. When I supply apples to schools and hospitals, I don't just sell fruit. I share years of research. Each apple represents healthier soil, cleaner water, and better nutrition for families. That is what I truly wanted, to make a difference. Karen looked at the documents on the table. The papers were filled with words and diagrams she did not fully understand, but she could see the seriousness behind them. This was not the work of a careless farmer. This was the work of a man who had dedicated his life to something important. For a moment, Karen did not know what to say. She felt small, as though all her complaints had been meaningless in comparison to the larger purpose David served. But her pride pushed her to speak. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked sharply. "If you are so respected, why keep it a secret?" David leaned back in his chair. "Because I did not come here for attention. I came for peace. I wanted to live quietly, without being judged by titles or positions. People should know me as David, the man who grows apples, not as some name in the newspaper." Karen blinked. She remembered the framed photos of him shaking hands with officials and standing on stages. She realized that he had walked away from all of that just to live a simpler life. It was a choice she could not imagine making. "But what about the neighborhood?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. "Don't you care that it disturbs people?" David looked at her kindly. "Karen, my farm is not here to disturb. It is here to give. The children who come here learn about nature. The families who take apples home share meals together. Even the officers who came left with smiles. If that is a disturbance, then I am guilty. But I believe it is the kind of disturbance that brings joy, not harm." Karen lowered her gaze. She could not argue with his words. She had seen the happiness on children's faces and heard the laughter that carried across the road. Deep down, she knew he was right. David stood and walked to a shelf. He picked up a framed photograph and handed it to her. The picture showed him standing with a group of children in a school garden, each holding a small apple sapling. Their faces were bright with excitement. "This is why I do what I do," David said. "Every tree planted, every apple grown is a chance to give something good to the next generation." Karen stared at the photo, her chest tightening. For the first time, she felt a strange mixture of respect and regret. She had judged him without knowing the truth, and now the truth was too clear to ignore. She set the photo back on the shelf and turned to him. I did not know," she admitted quietly. "I thought you were just another careless man trying to bend the rules." "I was wrong," David gave her a gentle smile. "It's easy to misunderstand when we don't take the time to see." "I don't blame you, Karen." Those words struck her deeply. He did not blame her, even after all her complaints and calls to the police. His patience made her feel even more ashamed of her actions. They walked back outside together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Children were once again running near the orchard, their laughter ringing through the air. Karen watched them silently, remembering how she used to see this as noise. Now for the first time it looked like life. David picked an apple from the tree and handed it to one of the children, who grinned with delight. Then he turned to Karen and said, "You are welcome here any time. My farm is open to everyone, even those who once doubted it." Karen stood still, her heart heavy with thoughts she could not yet express. She had discovered the truth about David, and it had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. That night, back in her home, Karen sat quietly by the window. She looked at the farm across the road, its lights glowing softly in the dark. She thought of the documents, the awards, the photographs, and the kindness in David's voice. For the first time, she wondered if maybe rules were not the only thing that held a community together. Maybe kindness, respect, and generosity were stronger than rules could ever be. And though she still struggled with her pride, Karen knew that the truth had changed her. The night after Karen learned the truth about David, she found it hard to sleep. She kept turning in bed, her mind replaying everything she had seen. The framed photographs, the awards, the children with their apple trees, and the calm way David had explained his work. She realized she had been so focused on rules that she had missed the bigger picture. Morning came slowly, and with it came the sound she had grown used to: children laughing across the road, a cart rolling over gravel, birds chirping in the orchard. For weeks these sounds had felt like an attack on her order, but now they felt different. They sounded like life itself. Karen stood by her window holding a cup of tea and watched David working in his orchard. He moved with ease, checking the branches, tying ropes where needed, guiding two young helpers who had come early. He was not just a farmer. He was a teacher, a builder of something larger than himself. For the first time, Karen felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: humility. She realized that the farm was not her enemy. The farm was a gift to the community. But Karen also knew her past actions had left a mark. People in the neighborhood were beginning to talk. Some whispered about her constant complaints, others mentioned the police visits, and a few even said she seemed jealous of David. Her reputation was slipping, and though she cared about rules, she cared about respect even more. That afternoon, Karen made a decision. She would not let her pride ruin her standing in the community. She would find a way to make peace with David, not only for her own image, but also because she finally understood the good he was doing. She walked across the road once more. David was stacking crates near his barn when he noticed her. He wiped his hands on a cloth and greeted her with a smile. "Good afternoon, Karen," he said warmly. "It's nice to see you again." Karen nodded, her lips pressed together. She had practiced what to say on her way there, but now the words felt heavy. Still, she forced herself to speak. "David, I came to apologize," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I was wrong about you. I judged too quickly. I thought you were disturbing the peace, but now I see you were building something good. I should not have called the police. I should not have tried to stop you." David looked at her kindly. His eyes showed no anger, only understanding. "Karen, thank you for saying that," he replied. "I know it wasn't easy, but what matters is that you came here today." Karen felt relief wash over her. For weeks she had carried the weight of her stubbornness, and now it felt lighter. But she also knew she needed to do more than apologize. She needed to show the community that she truly supported him. She took a deep breath. "David, is there a way I can help? Maybe I can join in your work, even if just a little. I may not know much about farming, but I can learn." David raised his eyebrows in surprise. For a moment he said nothing. Then a smile spread across his face. "Of course you can help. There is always something to do here. You can start with the children's group. They need someone to guide them when they come for visits. You are organized and firm. They would respect you." Karen blinked. She had expected him to ask her to carry crates or water trees, but instead he gave her a role that matched her nature, a role that used her love of order. She realized he had not only forgiven her but also trusted her to be part of his vision. "All right," she said, nodding slowly. "I'll do it." The following week, Karen joined David's farm work for the first time. When a group of children arrived with their teacher, Karen greeted them and explained the rules. She guided them through the orchard, making sure they stayed in line, washed their hands, and listened carefully. The children looked up to her with respect, and she found herself enjoying their curious questions. One child tugged at her sleeve and asked, "Miss Karen, can we really grow our own apple tree at home?" Karen smiled, surprised at how naturally her answer came. "Yes, you can, and if you take care of it, it will give you fruit year after year." The child's eyes lit up, and Karen felt a warmth in her heart that she had not felt in years. She realized this was what David meant when he spoke of giving something to the next generation. As days turned into weeks, Karen's presence on the farm became normal. She was no longer the neighbor who complained, but the helper who kept the children safe and guided. People in the community began to notice the change. Whispers of disapproval turned into words of respect. Neighbors said Karen had finally found her place. One evening, after the children had gone and the orchard was quiet, Karen and David sat on the porch of his farmhouse. The sun was sinking, painting the sky orange and purple. Karen held a basket of apples in her lap. "David," she said softly, "I used to think rules were everything. I believed order was the only way to keep a place good. But I see now that kindness and generosity are stronger. You taught me that." David looked out at the orchard and nodded. "Rules matter, Karen. They keep us safe. But rules alone can't build community. Community is built by people who care for one another. And you care. That's why the children respect you. Karen's eyes glistened as she looked at him. Thank you, she whispered. For forgiving me. For letting me be part of this, David smiled. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. The lesson was clear. Karen had spent her life clinging to control, but David had shown her that life was not about control. Life was about growth, about giving, about being part of something larger than oneself. As autumn deepened, the farm became even busier. Families came to pick apples, children painted pumpkins, and neighbors gathered for warm cider. Karen was always there, guiding, helping, smiling. She was no longer the outsider watching from her porch. She was part of the joy. One afternoon, as Karen walked home carrying a small basket of apples, she noticed two women from the neighborhood whispering nearby. For a moment, her old fear of gossip returned, but this time the whispers were different. She's changed, one woman said. Yes, the other agreed. She's happier now. She belongs there. Karen's steps grew lighter. She realized she had not only gained respect but also peace. By winter, the orchard was quiet under a blanket of snow. The trees rested, waiting for spring. Karen looked across the road from her window, and instead of annoyance, she felt gratitude. The farm was no longer a disturbance. It was a blessing. And so, the woman who once called the police on her neighbor now stood beside him, helping him grow not only apples but also trust, respect, and community. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Sometimes the greatest order comes not from rules but from kindness.